Welcome to the Cultural Anthropology class lecture by Colleen Baker, and the topic is Cross-Cultural Differences in the Expression of Power. This is in the Blue Book in Chapter 12. It is not in the reading assignments for the Brown Book. So you might remember from previous reading assignments or class lectures that there are three major types of societies: foragers, and then there are tribal societies, and there are complex societies. So in this portion, we're going to be talking about foraging societies. These are kind of like hunters and gatherers. So you might think about it as a Native American tribe that you have seen or read about. And in general, in this type of society, there's very low levels of violence, both within the group and with outside societies. And that's probably because these societies are fairly egalitarian. Adult males, so adult men, are relatively equal to other adult men, and adult women are relatively equal to other adult women. Now, even in society, the men and the women are fairly equal when it comes to power. They might have different gender roles or different jobs in the society, but they're still very egalitarian. And they deal with their problems mostly through gossip or shaming. And a society that you might have heard about in the United States today is the Amish. And you've probably heard about somebody who has been shamed in the Amish community because they haven't conformed to the norms. So maybe they're not allowed to have contact with other family members. Maybe they're not allowed to eat dinner at the same time as their family members. They get the silent treatment, so they're not allowed to be talked to for a certain amount of time. And this is a public shaming to make people conform. The problem with this society, especially in today's world, is that these societies are usually very small and they're a little bit isolated from other societies. So they're very prone to violence from larger groups or larger, maybe some agricultural societies. So as long as there are foragers living, like one group of foragers, forager A, and another group of forager B, and they're living nearly together, there doesn't seem to be a lot of violence between those two groups. However, if there's a forager society near a larger society, the foragers may become the prey. The second type of society is a tribal society. And this is a society where there's somebody in charge, but usually there's no actual authority behind the person in charge. And then also elder members of the group are the ones, like a council maybe, and they are probably the ones that are most likely making the decisions, and the headman goes along with the council. They do have larger societies with higher populations because in general, these societies have their herders, and they also have agriculture, but maybe not on a large scale. And they have ongoing warfare with enemies. And this isn't that they'll be at war for hundreds or thousands of years, but they might be at war for a couple of years, and then maybe at peace for a couple of years, then be at warfare again with a couple of years. And this is very common where raiders or revenge killings are the biggest threat. So it's not war scale, warfare where you've got nuclear weapons or anything like this. It's still a small scale warfare, but there's tension within the societies. And once again, the important thing is there's a headman who's recognized as the authority figure, but really has no authority behind the title. The third type of society is a complex society, and this is where there's actually true authority figures through a chiefdom, and maybe there's a council, or it could be that there's a king, there might be a monarchy, and then the aristocracy might advise him, or there might be a prime minister, there might be a president with a Senate and a House of Representatives, such as in the United States. So there is definitely an authority figure, and then there are also other political advisors that are going to ensure that we follow what needs to be followed. And there's a police force or a militia that's going to enforce these rules. So obviously if I'm going, driving in the speed limit 65 and I'm going 90, I could be worried about being pulled over by the police and then having a ticket or possibly arrested. And there's usually in these societies some type of a standing army. So the warfare increases with the complexity of the society. And in warfare, it might be warfare with outside societies, so it might be with one other group, but it might also be something with larger things like, say, World War II, where 6 or 7 countries are fighting against 6 or 7 other countries. And it also might be just warfare within the society. So you have, it might be something along, say, mafia families or something like that, but you also have violence amongst people, and it's probably because there isn't relative equality. When you go back to the foragers, with relative equality, there seems to be less violence. And with structured societies where there's a very difference between the wealthy and the poor, there seems to be more violence. One of the questions we are trying to figure out as anthropologists is, why do humans seem to be so violent toward other humans? And one of the ideas that has come up is that there's this, since we're social creatures and we need to form bonds with people, we form bonds with people that are similar to us. So there's this us against them mentality. And it might be our family and our traditions. I brought it up in the last slide, but it could be like a mafia family, or it could be if you think of a family in gang territory, so there might be the Bloods and the Crips, us against them, the Northerns versus the Southerns, us against them, and you're fighting over resources, or you're fighting over maybe power. There's also the idea of one nation against another nation. So if we are cohesive, it might be the United States against the USSR in the Cold War. And it could also be, a reason might be a cultural component. So it's like one culture against another culture. And this is often linked to ethnic differences, and it might often be linked to religious differences. So I hear sometimes, that we're in a religious warfare, because it seems like there might be worry that Christianity is under attack. And some people believe, though it's not based on the founding fathers of the United States, that the United States is a Christian nation. And as a result, it seems like there might be a fear of Islam taking over part or all of the United States. So it could be the religious warfare or the religious fear. So us, maybe nations that have dominant Christian societies against nations that have dominant Islam societies. Oftentimes the ideas of ethnic cleansing and genocide are confused and used interchangeably. Ethnic cleansing is a term used to refer to tactics to remove an unwanted member or members of society. So this would usually be done through, say, relocation or reprogramming. Genocide, in contrast, is where the goal is to destroy individuals or part of or the whole part of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Okay, so to put this into context, ethnic cleansing might be relocation. So relocation would be the result of, say, you probably know of the Trail of Tears, where the United States government moved approximately 60,000 Native Americans from Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, Choctaw, and Seminole tribes from east of the Mississippi River, where their native land was, to west of the Mississippi River, mainly going into Oklahoma. And it was a place where people were dying from starvation, almost like a death march. And if they did get to the reservations where they were allowed to go, then resources were slim and very different from their native lands. So that would be a relocation. Another relocation that you may have heard about is the Armenian genocide, or the Armenian consequences of World War I. And the Armenian population was a Christian population living in the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was a very powerful empire in the 18 and early 1900s. And their general ethnicity was Islam. And, well, not their religion was Islam. And they had religious tolerance. But during the years of World War I, the belief was that the Armenians were siding with the Russians and that the Armenians could not be trusted, so they had to leave the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans rounded up the Armenians, men, women, and children, and moved them, had them walk into the Syrian desert. And along the way, they died from starvation, they died from disease, and then also many of the Ottoman troops were killing any of the Armenians who resisted along the way. So bodies were littered. So that's a relocation. So the goal may not be to massacre the entire population, but the goal might be to relocate people to a different area. When it comes to reprogramming, these two same populations were also put under reprogramming. So the Trail of Tears was from 1831 to 1887. After that time, what happened is, you guys might have remembered that there were Indian residential schools or boarding schools where children of Native American tribes were rounded up when they were about 5 or 6 years old, transported to boarding schools where they would learn English and they would learn Christianity. And you didn't have the choice. You were forced to go to these schools. So if you are thinking about the Susanville area, the major tribe in Susanville is the Maidu tribe. And they actually, where the railroad depot is, they would actually round up the kids at the end of every summer, put them on a train, and take them down to Ontario, California, which is about 500 miles away. And of course, the families couldn't afford a train ticket back. So by the time the children gained maturity, so the children would pretty much live at the school from the time that they were 5 years old until the time that they were 18, they might be able to leave and come back to their home after they graduated from school. But by that time, the only language that they knew was English, and the only ideas that they understood were the ideas that they were programmed to understand by the dominant culture, and their religion was no longer their native religion, but their religion was Christianity. So even when they came back to their homes, they weren't able to talk to their grandparents or even their parents because they didn't speak the language and they didn't understand the religious culture. And that's why today, you fast forward to 2020, that's why today so many of the Native American languages and traditions are being lost because the elder generations who truly knew this have not been able to pass that on to the younger generations. The Armenians were also reprogrammed, so oftentimes young boys who were Armenian and Christian were taken from their families and they were sent to live with Muslim families and to be brought up in the Muslim culture. And it was, in this way it was sort of good. Of course, it was terrible for the Armenian families, but it was sort of good for the Armenian boys because they would learn the new culture and then they would have opportunity to have military service or opportunity for government jobs. A difference is, say, the genocide of World War II. I'm sure that you know the Jewish genocide, where the goal was actually to eliminate the entire culture. And another genocide that you may have remembered is the Rwandan genocide, and that was between the Tutsis and the Hutu, and the goal was to wipe out the entire Tutsi culture in Rwanda. Aside from the ideas of how come humans seem to be inhumane, another question is, why are we indifferent to things like ethnic cleansing or genocide? And there are some ideas that anthropologists have about this, and they say that human beings can be very heroic, and oftentimes in a crisis situation, one individual will perform a deed that is unbelievable to others, even in the consequence of them being killed themselves. So something like if a train is coming by and somebody is falling on the train tracks, an individual might grab that person, jump on the train tracks, help that person back out, and both of them hopefully are saved. A fireman might run into a burning building to help a child or to help a person that's stuck inside the burning building. So individually, we can really have an impact on saving and helping another person. But in large-scale collective violence, humans don't seem to do that as much. Instead, humans tend to turn a blind eye to it. Maybe if it's happening directly in our neighborhood, there might be one individual, like say Harriet Tubman, who is running the Underground Railroad, saving slaves from the South and escorting them to the North where they would be free. But that's a very rare occurrence. And it turns out that there are a couple of philosophies or ideas that people have about why we seem as a human race to be indifferent to large-scale acts of violence. And one idea is that we are so desensitized over our lifetime to small-scale violences that we're able to almost turn our minds off to large-scale violence. So if you think about this with the Rwandan genocide, the Hutus and the Tutsis, you might remember from that genocide that the Hutus called the Tutsis cockroaches. So they were dehumanizing this entire population, and they'd seen small-scale acts of violence over and over and over in everyday life that make us desensitized to it. So I think about this like, I watched The Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead is a zombie apocalypse television show. And the first zombie, show that came out for The Walking Dead, once it started getting into season 1, it was pretty brutal. You're killing zombies, and it was very disgusting. Now that I don't know what season it's on, it's like season 8 or something. Killing zombies is just overall no big deal. And now people are, chopping off heads and things along those lines. So you get desensitized to the violence that you're seeing, and the producers keep bringing more violence to the show. And that would be how this might play out. In another idea is that the way humans evolved, we evolved to have certain traits, and other traits we just can't comprehend. So the one trait is that we evolved to help somebody in immediate danger. And the idea is if your friend or if your neighbor or if your family member or if your companion is attacked by a lion, you're probably going to certainly jump in there and try and help to save that person, and you're going to be fighting off a huge force of the lion to do that. And that's an evolutionary trait that evolved. But with large-scale acts of violence, because we evolved to be to live in small groups, and we've lived in small groups, Homo sapiens, for 250,000 years before agriculture, which has only been around since about the last 10,000 years. So since we evolved for small groups and to fight off very immediate threats, we really can't even comprehend what to do when large-scale violence begins.